Welcome back to class.
Today we're going to focus on several important competencies, paraphrasing and summarizing fiction and nonfiction. Here's Jenny.
Now, what is paraphrasing fiction? Paraphrasing means you put the whole passage that you read into your own words, and you're trying to keep all of the same ideas. Now, you might be wondering, how do I paraphrase? Here's what you do. First thing you need to do is reword the passage. So replace words in the passage with synonyms or words that have a similar meaning. After that, you're going to want to rearrange. So make sure that you keep all of the ideas from the passage, but you might put them in a different order. And then you want to reread. You want to check to make sure that your passage contains all of the same ideas and details as the original passage without copying any of the exact language. Otherwise, that would be plagiarism. Remember, only paraphrase sections, not the entire story. Now, when we talk about summarizing fiction, it's helpful to think about the graph that we looked at in our last video. Remember the plot diagram? With summarizing fiction, you're putting the main ideas of a story into your own words. So you need to identify the most important events in the story, the supporting details that you need to know to understand the important events, and the main idea or the theme. So again, it's helpful to think about a plot diagram while writing your summary. So think about the most important parts of the exposition or the main character and setting, the most important events in the rising action, the climax, the most important events of the falling action, and then finally, the most important parts of the resolution, or that word that Molly and I did not know how to pronounce. Remember how to pronounce it?
Denouement.
Denouement. Now, here are some things to remember when you're summarizing. You do want to only include the most important parts. You do want to only include events that drive the plot forward. You do want to include major conflict and major themes. But some things to avoid. You don't want to include your opinion. You don't want to include unimportant details. And do not include quotes.
Okay, let's look at some examples and give you a chance to practice a little bit on your own. So here's a passage from A Long Walk to Water, that book that we all read together last term. So look at this passage. In your notebook, try to paraphrase this passage. So paraphrase it. Keep all the same details and important points, but put it in your own words. So pause the video now, write down an example of paraphrasing this passage, and I'll show you an example in a minute. Okay, let's look at my example. Now there's a lot of ways to paraphrase, so it's okay if yours is a little different from this. But here's my example. When Salva first started walking through the desert, the heat and the sun made it feel like he was walking forever. The sun was constant, and there were not any clouds or breeze. Salva had trouble breathing, and the longer he walked, the weaker he became. So notice how all of the details and important points in the passage are still there. We learned that the sun is really hot, it feels like he's been walking for a really long time, the sun won't go away, there's no clouds or breeze, he's having trouble breathing, and he's getting really weak as he walks. But notice how I used different words in some places. So instead of saying the sun was relentless and eternal, I said the sun was constant, which means the same thing as eternal. At the end, instead of saying that every breath Salva takes drains his strength, I said that he's becoming weaker. So I'm keeping the same ideas, but I'm using my own words and synonyms to put it into my own language instead of copying it. Notice also there are some places where the order of things has been switched around a little bit. The first sentence in the original passage says that this feels like the longest day Salva has ever lived through. In my paraphrased version, I still say he was walking forever, but I move that to the end of the first sentence. So I'm keeping all the main ideas, but playing around with the order a little bit to make it my own original writing. Okay, so double check your paraphrased version of this passage and make sure you didn't copy any language directly, but that you have all the same ideas present that were in the original passage. Feel good about paraphrasing? Good. Let's look at an example of a summary now. This is a summary I wrote of the book we read. It's a little long because it was a long book, but this is about the length of a summary of like a chapter book. So you can read through it on your own, pause the video, and notice how this summary contains information about the main characters, the important conflicts, the important plot moments that really keep the story driving forward, a climax of the story, and a bit about the major themes in the story. So think about how you might summarize this book on your own.
Now let's talk about nonfiction. What is nonfiction? Nonfiction is writing that is informational, true, or based on facts. So here are some common types of nonfiction writing. We can have biographies or autobiographies. We can have expository writing. We can have narrative nonfiction, informational, and persuasive. To give you a bit of an easy little thing to remember, fiction is something that's not real. Nonfiction is real. So everything that we would read in history class or things that you read in your science class, we would call that nonfiction writing. The steps to summarizing nonfiction are as follows. First thing you want to do is read and comprehend the nonfiction article. So take your time if you need to, but first thing you want to do is read and just try to understand what it's about. Once you've done that, you need to ask yourself, what was this text about? Okay, so you need to identify the main ideas and the key points of what you read. And an important part of this is step 4. You need to learn how to distinguish between essential and non-essential information. What is the most critical and what is a little bit less important? And then finally, express the essential information in your own words. So remember, essential is the most important information, and you're putting it into your own words.
Okay, 2 terms that were used on that previous slide are main idea and key points. The main idea is what the text is all about. Maybe you're reading an article about how mummies were made in ancient Egypt. That would be the main idea. The key points are arguments or information that are used to support the main idea. So those are any supporting information, maybe facts, references to other sources, important things that you need to know in order to know what the main idea is talking about. Key points may be developed with supporting details. These are smaller details that help make sure each of the key points is clear and is well supported. Your summary should only include the main idea and the key points. You don't need to include the supporting details. So the main idea is the main topic of the entire article. The key points are the things that are directly supporting that main idea. So those things you need to include in your summary. You don't need to include the smaller details that help support the key points. So to summarize, things to include in your summary of a nonfiction article are the main idea, the key points, and any essential information that you need to know what the main idea is saying. Do not include your opinion about the article, whether you think it's a good article or bad, whether you liked it, what you think about what it's saying. Don't include background information. So if your article is about mummies in ancient Egypt, you don't need to include more information about pyramids or the kings of ancient Egypt that are not present in the article. Don't include personal information. So sometimes when you're writing about a text, we ask you to connect to it or relate to it. Don't do that in a summary. Just include information that's in the text. And lastly, don't include those supporting details that were used to support the key points. Just include the big main idea and then the things that are directly supporting that main idea.
All right, that's the end of our lesson. We hope you learned a lot.
Okay, now go over to the Google Classroom. On the Google Classroom, there's a fictional story and a nonfiction article posted. We want you to write a summary of both the story and the nonfiction article and submit it to us through a Google quiz that's also posted on the Google Classroom. If you have questions, let us know. We're looking forward to reading what you write.
Until next time.
Bye.